From millions of copies sold in the 90s to now less than 1,000 active players across the whole genre, this is anti-gravity racing, a subgenre defined by two franchises that are currently dead. The reason why Wipeout fans aren't longing for a sequel is because they already have Ballistic and G. F-Zero fans on the other hand have nothing at the same level of quality. There have been some attempts though, but all of them are in early access. And I'm not gonna fanboy over an unfinished product just because their creators are based. Starting with Super Pilot, a game that looks like F-Zero but plays like a sped up kart racer with shitty drift boost mechanics. No! Stop! You don't make soda and water! The game's been in early access for 7 years and at the current rate is gonna need decades more to complete. Next, a game where the faster you go, the more boost you get. This game's main selling point is being fast, but the sense of speed alone is never going to carry an entire game. It does feel impressive at first, but the novelty wears off quickly, especially as you realize just how much of the game takes place in a straight line, where all you do is hold W, spam boost, and occasionally nudge the steering. Barrow. The game's ill-equipped for medium speed corners and shallow in high speed and sharp turns. This is due to vehicles being equipped with some of the strongest brakes in all of racing games. They bring you to a stop in a near instant and give you insane turn-in. It's almost as if, much like GX, the game's trying to ignore Newton's first law, blindly copying something without understanding what didn't make it good. Nostalgia baiting at its finest, which is also the case with Aero GPX, boasting a 97% positive rating and known as a true F-Zero GX successor. Well, if you watched my video on GX, you'd know I was disappointed in that game coming from X. But then I saw an unhealthy number of people saying this game's closer to X than GX. Well, they're likely referring to the soundtrack and aesthetics, because the driving tells a different story. Much like GX, ships have incredibly high straight-line grip, strafing is on the stronger side, and it's much harder to break traction. More importantly, the game's somewhat of a floor hugger. The ships are either glued to the track or flying, with elevation changes having no effect on the handling. Even the tracks have more resemblance to GX, but I'm happy to announce they're more restricted in terms of width. Sadly, most of them are either too simple or gimmicky and aren't a challenge to navigate in the slow and grippy vehicles. Even the newly introduced gameplay elements were questionable. I cruised through my first playthrough with ease, feeling like I was continuing a game that had already used up what it had to offer. But then I discovered this game actually does bring a few things from F-Zero X. The stupid fucking glitches are now intentional mechanics. Why? Who asked for this? Take a look at F-Zero's leaderboards and tell me how many people seriously play the game this way. The huge time caps speak more than enough. Well, as few as they are, I've never seen people fanboy harder over a racing game than with Aero GPX, so in order to lower my chances of a comment section bloodbath, I'm gonna replay the game and utilize the glitches this time. It wiped my save file anyway, one of many reasons why you shouldn't invest playtime into early access slop. Whatever, let's get to wall riding. The glitches allow you to get to insane speeds, and with the ships being too slow by default, this should theoretically improve the gameplay balance. Well, it ended up doing a lot more than that. Aero introduces flying sections that are basically a snooze fest in normal gameplay. In advanced gameplay, however, they're just a sad excuse to gain free heights, so you can use it to dive back down and gain more speed. In normal gameplay, you'll usually end up with plenty of leftover health at the end of each race. Oh, I should mention that health and boosts are now separate? Yeah, that's a bummer considering that in advanced gameplay, you can use the extra health to wall ride and gain speed. Oh, so you can still trade health for speed? What's the problem then? The walls! They hardly punish you anymore. They went from a challenge to a cheap trick. Losing traction is avoided in normal gameplay. In advance, you lose traction on purpose, cause for some reason sliding is faster than going in a straight line when using boost. Thank God there's a reasonable cooldown on side attacks. In normal gameplay you have to avoid going off the cylinders. In advance, you break off the cylinders on purpose, cause free speed! I think you get it now. Navigating the tracks did become more challenging, but only thanks to the artificial speed you get from performing these tricks. The overall gameplay, however, was heavily altered in a weird way. I wasn't punished for going off the track, hitting walls, or losing traction. I was actually rewarded for it. In some ways, the game became easier. Aero doesn't even tell you about these tricks. You have to learn about them in a Steam guide. Obviously it doesn't want to scare its casual audience away. And with the glitches, it transforms the gameplay so much that you're basically playing a different game. It feels like the game's trying to target two audiences and misses the mark on both. Who exactly is this game made for? The answer was in the description all along. It says, instead of feeling like you're driving the machine, Aero GPX aims to give you the feeling of controlling the machine as if it were a character in an action game. You're not driving a vehicle, you're controlling a character. It all makes sense now. I didn't keep the most momentum because I landed smoothly. The game artificially applied more speed because I pressed the button at the right time. There's speed, but there's no momentum. It's more about tricks and less about physics. Aero leans more towards a movement game than a vehicle-based racing game. I know what the game is about now, it just isn't for me. It does look like F-Zero and it borrows many of its elements, but it's a different game at its core. Which is also the case with ArcRacer, a bare-bone but incredibly promising hybrid of F-Zero X and the 2D F-Zeros. Well, it was. Fast forward to full release and the game has taken an entirely new direction. Half the Grand Prix mode is now about flying and jumping. You could end up spending more time in air than you do on the ground. If you weren't tired of NASCAR tracks in Superpilot, get ready for an abundance of 90-degree corners. Should we learn nothing from Mute City 3? Doesn't matter though, the game's so flight-centric, you'll end up cutting more corners than actually taking them. Not only shortcuts save you several seconds, but some are arguably easier and safer than the main path. Good thing the game comes with an F-Zero X style track editor with the ability to share tracks online. It would have been a strong aspect if the ground handling didn't also take a turn for the worse. Ships are wildly unpredictable and randomly get a burst of seemingly infinite grip that throws you off. This happens way too often. But apparently, it's a game mechanic called quick turning, and as of writing, it isn't mentioned anywhere. Not in the tutorial, not in the patch notes, not in Steam forums, not even in the game's Discord. The only place you can learn about this is from one of my live streams where the game developer himself happened to explain it. But that's not the main problem. Why does this even exist? What's the point of having a grip stat when you can have infinite grip on demand? What's the point of corners now? And it's not like the vehicle didn't have plenty of grip already. You really don't need this. If you don't know about it, it randomly kills you, and once you learn it, it takes the challenge away. People say I'm too nitpicky complaining about things like wall riding, not realizing that these can be game-breaking stuff. And you know what else is? Side attack mashing and Arab drifting. There are so many effortless ways to go fast in this game and absolutely destroy it. You can at least see what Aero is going for, but this game, I have no idea. It feels like they threw in a bunch of seemingly random ideas, good and bad, without any cohesion or structure, and hoped for the best. The final result is a chaotic mess with no balance whatsoever. Maybe that's a selling point? I did find some enjoyment here, before experimenting with side attack spamming, learning about quick turning, discovering brain-dead shortcuts, how cheap and exploitable drift boosting is, you get the point. Most of it came from the driving missions, which offer a variety of different objectives and take place on gimmicky but fun courses that do a much better job at forcing you to utilize the normal game mechanics. But that was about it. It's not just the gameplay that's a complete mess, it's the whole game. Despite hitting version 1.0, this is still an early access game. If random quick turns weren't bad enough, you'll often find yourself performing side attacks by accidentally double tapping the strafe button. Even a miss of a game like Get Wrecked recognizes as an issue and had an option to mitigate it. You know what else it had? Remappable controls! How do you have an accessibility tab and not custom bindings? Despite the simplistic visuals, the game limits you to 20 vehicles per race and still won't run well. And that's it. So, none of the F-Zero looking games here actually play like F-Zero. They just look like it for the nostalgia bait effect. The gameplay is heavily altered and not in a better way. I did find some enjoyment out of Aero and especially ArcRacer, but not as much as F-Zero X or even the Game Boy F-Zeros. And they certainly didn't live up to my expectations as games where I control anti-gravity vehicles. I'd much rather ArcRacer outright use 3D models for ships. Not only they're less confusing in gameplay, but also less likely to give you the false impression of this being an F-Zero clone. But let's assume Aero is the perfect GX or even X successor that its incredibly dedicated fans make it out to be. That's it? Just another F-Zero GX with slightly different mechanics and hardly any modern improvements? Ballistic NG is a whole modding platform, and even ArcRacer has a track editor. Now, what do we get in Aero after 6 years of development and over 100k raised? Just 4 Grand Prix. People buy the game out of nostalgia, play it for some hours, and never touch it again. It should be common sense, but here's some early access disclaimer you can pause and read. But what about the elephant in the room? There has actually been an official F-Zero game released in 2023. Well, I'm not gonna spend $200 to play a game so that the lobbies are being filled with bots. Especially considering that it's basically a 35-year-old game with an online mode slapped on top. And that was every modern F-Zero looking game I could find. And since this is the second to last episode, I'm gonna go over the last remaining AGRs released up until late 24. I can already see someone commenting, "You're just rage baiting and hate on games that 97% of people love." Well, let's try something with the exact same rating. A game with a calming atmosphere that consists entirely of a rage-inducing time-wasting game mode. Phantom Spark is not a bad game, but it is a simple, generic time attack racing game. So it's bad. Basic but responsive controls with not much variety in terms of tracks. I give it 1 point for being able to adjust camera smoothing, and that is everything I have to say about it. Just one of many examples as to why Steam user reviews can no longer be taken seriously. As usual, there's gonna be people in the comments saying things like, "The game you didn't like is the best racing game I've ever played." and then you look at what other racing games they've played and find nothing but garbage like fucking Garfield Kart. I'm not kidding, people like this exist! Next up we have Redout sequel, and I think it's best we first go over this game's controversial launch. So many people got stuck on this game's tutorial that a day one patch was released just to address the difficulty. So I downloaded the original release, and in my first attempt, ended up destroying the gold medals. To be fair, the game's tutorial is also to blame here for not teaching you all the mechanics. The game informs you about two separate boost buttons. What it doesn't say is that you can use both boosts at the same time. If you figure that out by yourself, the hardest level is easily defeated. And if you don't, it's the same story. I ditched double boosting and simply used the boosts one after the other and still managed to comfortably beat the level. So once again, major skill issue. That being said, boosting is incredibly crucial in this game. As if AGRs weren't already so heavily reliant on track memorization, Redout 2 takes this a step further by also throwing boost pattern memorization into the mix. The boosting system can be summarized as an overly complicated version of the usual shared health and boost from hover racing. At least we get pace notes this time around. They're not accurate, but give you an idea of what to expect and some time to react. Now I want this in every AGR. The biggest change you'll notice if you're not a Wipeout or Lore Master is that hitting walls finally comes with a punishment. Not only do they slow you down, but also halt health regeneration. They also opted for a more fitting grippier handling, full flight controls in air, and strafing that for the first time in 30 years isn't completely broken or useless. Sadly, much like Aero, the game's nearly a floor hugger. You do need to pitch over elevation changes, but only because the game artificially applies damage and slowdown if you don't. There are so many tracks in this game, but they don't really play different as much as they look different. Most of the distinction comes from the flight sections. Beyond that, it's like they're all built out of the same few dozen track pieces. Redout 2 claims to be the fastest game in the universe, and while it isn't a slow game, it also fakes its speed by increasing the FOV so much that you can hardly see what's ahead at times. It led down to an otherwise nice chase camera that even points upwards when entering inclines, but not declines. It doesn't cheap out by switching to the god-awful bumper cam when taking a loop, for example. Redout 2 features a 40-hour-long campaign, and that is excluding the DLC. No wonder less than 3% of people finished it. Well, that's what you have to do if you want to unlock upgrades and visual parts, of which there are plenty of. This is the first AGR that allows you to rise up your ship, and different performance builds add a bit of variety to ship behavior. One notable feature is that you can queue for an online match while racing in single player, which is a must-have in dead games like this. Of course, just like every other dead game, this is no use for new players. They're still gonna get destroyed the moment they enter an online match with other veterans. Well, at least the Redout community realized this and hosted a tournament for people below a certain playtime threshold. And it was better than nothing. Weeks of heads up meant that you had people ranging from having practiced 100 hours to not even using the meta build. All that for only 8 races. The multiplayer is just as laggy as Ballistic NG. This is the only AGR where you can physically spin people out. I'm still waiting for the first racing game that nerfs the player's vehicle based on their skill level. I wouldn't pick this game over Ballistic NG with the anti-wall ride mod, but despite the less than satisfactory sales, rough launch, and poor performance, Redout 2 is one of the better modern AGRs you can pick up today. And so is ArcRacer, the other truly distinct modern AGR. Might look like Wipeout, but its gameplay and physics are unique. In other AGRs, turning and strafing at the same direction resulted in sharper cornering, while inverse inputs resulted in a drift, similar to an aircraft. ArcRacer's strafing, however, is the opposite and behaves more like cars. It shifts your weight horizontally, and if that's not enough, you can spend energy to side shift. You pick up ores that can be used to either recharge energy or gain a speed boost. The vehicles awkwardly veer to the opposite direction when letting go of the strafe, and wall collisions are concerningly forgiving. Yeah, what's up with the excessive wall collision rebound in every game? It's either incredibly annoying, ping-ponging you to the opposite wall, or worse, the rebound force ends up being exploited and turned into free speed or extra grip. Despite the small vehicle selection, each feels distinct in handling and serves a different purpose. The tracks are surprisingly well thought out, even with the 90-degree corner spam, and you can even make your own if you ever figure out a track editor. There isn't much in terms of racing though. Not only the leader gets all the orbs, but the rubber banding is akin to fatal inertias. You can cut the track, if it lows that is, but they'll still be right behind you in the next corner. ArcRacer is a satisfying game to play for a short while, but unfortunately is unlikely to improve further due to it flopping hard into obscurity. Just like anything AGR related that isn't F-Zero GX nostalgia bait. It is also the last game. We just went through an entire subgenre of racing games, the vast majority of it at least. I'm gonna rank all the games and put them on a tier list in a bonus video on another channel. Yeah, that channel will become a lot more active, cause this one mostly consists of dead bots nowadays. That or nationalists who only want videos about a certain country that I fucking hate talking about anymore. But there's still one more main episode to go, which will explain why anti-gravity racing games are dead and will remain dead.